the episodes you guys did on the West Mesa, and again, just show you how uneducated I am. I had no idea that. I just thought it was like the West Mesa serial killer. I did not know that they were called the West Mesa Bone Collector.
Yeah.
I did not know they had a pro wrestler fucking name attached to them.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, holy shit. Okay. So, it blows my mind that the dude that lived 3 miles away.
That could see the site from his house, pretty much.
And
that's a different guy. That's a different guy I was thinking of. Sorry.
Well, but there were two guys that really seemed like these could be the ones. It was a guy, it was like Frank Montoya or something like that. Franklin Montoya.
I forgot what his name was, but he lived in the trailer that was like he could see the site.
Right.
Right. And he's the one that had strangled the sex worker.
Right.
Yes. And then there was the other guy. I think he was a native guy.
He had pictures, right?
Yeah.
He had like 10,000 pictures of sex workers he had killed. And they ended up prosecuting and convicting him on the stuff they found on him, right?
Right.
And he's still in prison. And he's right.
I think that guy's dead.
Okay. I know he had a really big sentence.
Yeah.
But the first dude, he had he lived 3 miles away, and he had strangled a sex worker, and then he right around the time he was getting tied to the murder, or to the murderers rather, right when he was getting tied to it, a pimp had killed him.
Yeah,
or a boyfriend.
The boyfriend of the sex worker that he strangled and tried to kill, killed him.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's an attempted murder by strangling.
Right.
The girl walked outside, like barely clothed, right? And then the boyfriend / pimp was there and was like, hey, what the fuck? And went and killed the guy on sight.
Yeah.
So they couldn't ever investigate, or they decided to stop investigating his route because he was dead.
There's also a contingent of police that believe that it was multiple killers.
Okay, so there's
working together.
Multiple killers. Okay.
In power.
Why do they think that?
They have their reasons. I don't know. Like I didn't talk to them. So one of my friends who started a podcast that I think has kind of gone away, it was called The Mesa, and it was all about the West Mesa Bone Collector. She was talking to the investigators on the case, like directly, and she was an investigative journalist. So she uncovered through them that they think very strongly that it was probably a handful of political figures and people in power that were having their way with women that were on the street for one reason or another. Not all of them were sex workers. Some of them were, there were some underage girls involved in this or that were killed. There was also some women that had addiction challenges, but they weren't necessarily sex workers. So the thought is that there was almost like a sex trafficking kind of ring thing happening where people would kill these women and dispose of them.
I mean, not for nothing, but who had a ranch in Santa Fe?
Right.
Not for nothing,
right?
But for people who don't know, maybe we should explain the West Mesa shit anyway. But for people who don't know, Jeffrey Epstein, of the Epstein Island, had his main
Zorro Ranch,
in Santa Fe, or outside of Santa Fe.
South of Santa Fe, between like Santa Fe and Klein's Corners.
Yeah. So that's not exactly out of the realm of... And so a friend of mine, I'm not going to name who, but a friend of mine, I'm going to keep gender out of this, they and a couple of their friends took a Jeep and actually made it onto Zorro Ranch when the Epstein shit was popping off. And they showed me videos of it.
Yeah.
And they're like, you go up to a gate and you press a button and Jolene's voice comes out of it. And it's like a stock voicemail. It's like, hey, we're not here right now. If you're here for this, do this. Like a standard voicemail type shit, right? Of directions. They drove the property and they found an opening in the fence and they decided to go in. And they're riding around the fence or they're riding around the property. And in the videos, I swear to you, I saw the video. There are like little, there's something out of a video game. There's like these little black openings that are tunnels that you can drive into. And there's fresh, like they remember they drove up next to one and they showed it on the video. There's fresh tire marks coming in and out of these tunnels, and these little openings are all around the property. And then, like, frankly, I don't know how they were there for as long. They were there for like a little over an hour. I don't know how they were there that long, because also in the video you see they're not very big, but they're these little like black boxes around the property. And I would have to, they didn't tell me what they were. They didn't know what they were. I would have to imagine that those were pressure sensors, so for a security system, so that if there's too much pressure than there should be, it's like, oh, there's people on the property. Right. They can send out security, or they're fucking hitmen, or whatever.
Police, or whatever.
Yeah. So anyway, if it was a sex trafficking ring of people that are in power in the state or just in federal government that come into the state, because again, Epstein, or just rich people in general. I mean, in my brain, it's not exactly out of the realm of possibility to think that they're like, well, we have this giant dumping site that we can just use. Yeah. And they did that there. So without going further into that, so the bullet points, just explain what how the initial femur got found, and like, what is this whole case?
There was a woman who was a nurse who used to go running in the desert on the mesa. And so she would do it every morning. And around this time, there was some heavy expansion of housing going into that area. For a long time, that area was just empty, desert, wild land. She saw the femur and recognized it as a nurse. Like, she knows her anatomy. She really strongly felt that it was a human femur. And so this was dug up as they were kind of developing this area. It's really hard to know how big the gravesite is. It's a mass gravesite. But there were already houses built around there before the femur was found. So we don't really know how many victims there are. And this goes back to what we were talking about before. New Mexico, like, you could do that. You could get away with this here because it is so empty in a lot of places. But yeah, so she found it. They started digging. They had to stop construction. People were mad. Their houses didn't get built. But yeah, they uncovered, I don't even know how many bodies. It
was like 11 or 13, right?
Let's look here.
It was like 11 or 13 bodies, and it ranged. They weren't very old. The age ranges were from 15 to like 27.
11 girls and women.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there was like one woman who was pregnant, right? Because they found the body of a fetus.
Yep.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys had said that there was like 7,500 yards worth of like digging that had to happen because they didn't know how. Again, you didn't, like you just said, how far the expansion went. And this got blown open in 2009. It's assumed that they stopped burying around 2005.
Or they changed the location.
Or changed locations, right. But in that location specifically, 2005-ish.
Yeah.
And even as a kid, I remember seeing that on the news, like, what the fuck? We have a serial killer? Like, what? And so now, still nobody knows.
And women are still going missing.
Right. What's again, this is all hypothetical, but what evidence has there been any missing woman that could be connected to something like that?
If you talk to Street Safe New Mexico, they will tell you yes, there are. And they have their ear to the ground. They're talking to women who are victims of sex trafficking, women who are in sex work. That is their mission. That is what they do. They help them. Yeah. So they have a bad guy list where they post it for women who are out there on the streets to watch out for certain cars, certain appearances of certain individuals. So they believe that women are still being killed today, and that the police really don't care and aren't doing anything about it. I don't have any evidence to verify what they're saying, but I have found them to be pretty credible. I found them to be not careless with the information that they share.
Well, we should, and I meant to bring this up earlier, so thank you for saying that. We should add that Street Safe is ran by Cynthia.
She founded it, yeah.
That this is called a callback, ladies and gentlemen. That survived the toy box killer. Like this is a person that, and you brought the phrase you used a little earlier was like basically just like someone who came out of adversity to something better for life. I forget what you said earlier.
Turning tragedy into purpose.
Thank you, tragedy into purpose.
Yeah,
that is exactly who came to mind.
Yeah,
she was a sex worker living a horrible life.
Yeah,
and she experienced probably one of the worst case scenarios that they can experience.
Yeah,
and got her shit together. Now she runs this organization.
Yeah.
And not to disparage the work, but an organization that is doing more of the dirty work, again, putting their ear to the ground, talking to people nobody else really wants to talk to, really get their hands dirty with it. With the way things are going, like we've outlined, I'm kind of more inclined to believe what they're getting, the people that they're talking to.
Yeah.
Again, people that, yes, are they talking to drug addicts? Yes, are they talking to sex workers? Yes. Can they be the most reliable sources? No. But who else are you going to talk to with this subject? The government's already failing, obviously.
Right.
So if you can find a couple of people who are more coherent than the others, is that not to say to say that is a completely useless source of information is false.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of people can write it off like that.
Agree.
So anyway, so back to the West Mesa thing.
Yeah.
So. Okay, so because I remember listening to your episode that there was an idea that maybe it was a corrupt cop. Like that was a conversation. And I remember hearing that at the time too. Well, a few years after. I remember hearing that maybe there's a corrupt police officer that was going around doing it. Is there any credibility to that now?
I don't know.
More than anything else?
It's such a hard one, man.
Yeah.
It's such a hard one. I think that the theory that my friend Tierna talks about in her show makes the most sense to me, just because how did they get away with it for so long? And I'm not saying that the other two men weren't terrible and didn't do horrible things.
Right.
And it's quite possible that one of them could have been also taking advantage of the fact that the Mesa was empty.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That is a possible. I mean, yeah, we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Right.
And I don't see that being out of our possibilities either. Let's say that the majority of that was used by some people in power. And then at the same time, because again, how fucking massive, like people don't understand, like 75 football fields.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's huge. So it is also well within the realm of possibility that somebody else saw that and had the same idea.
And I don't think they've done ground penetrating radar on any of the other areas where the houses are already built because of pressure from the people who live there. They don't want to know. They don't want the value of their houses going down.
I said, I'll bet you it's a matter of they don't want the values going down. They don't want intrusion. They just don't want fuckers in their homes when they're all detectives.
Which is fair. It's fair, but also at the same time, like there are missing women and there are families that are probably looking for them.
I would say like, hey man, take a little sacrifice for a second.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Like, and that, I don't know. Oh, God. Because it's not their fault that they bought houses where there may or may not be dead bodies.
Right.
But then at the same time, it's nobody's fault. Except for the people that
Except
did
for
it.
the killers, yeah.
Like, fuck.
But it makes me want to like think like, man, we should be ground penetrating radar everywhere we're building all the time in New Mexico. Like
you would think, right?
Like it should just be, and I know that like the builders won't do it because it's going to cost a lot of money,
a shit ton of money,
and then they're going to lose whatever,
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's not out of the more conspiratorial theory is not out of the realm of possibility,
Right.
and I think it only adds, and I think the fact that Epstein operated out of here only adds to the fact.
Yeah.
And we know that Bill Richardson was on the fucking flight logs.
Yep.
He went to the island regularly.
Yep.
Wasn't he in charge during when the West Mesa shit popped off?
He might have been governor then.
Yeah.
He could have been. I think it was early 2000s if I remember correctly. Yeah. Yeah.
Listen, dude, I'm not Batman. I'm not a detective.
You got a batarang,
but but I mean, it just lines up.
Yeah.
It lines up almost too well.
Yeah.
And it's a very silly question to ask. Do you think it'll ever get solved? Because personally, I don't think anybody knows.
So this is something about true crime. There's a lot of things about true crime that drive me nuts. This is one of them. When people say, "Oh, this case is never going to get solved. Oh, this is never going to happen." Oh, and I get why they say that. Like, I understand it. But the thing is that there is always hope.
Yeah.
There's always hope. And I think that family members of victims need to know that there is always hope. You look at the Golden State Killer. That guy operated for decades. Nobody thought that they could ever figure out who he was, because he moved all over California. And he was a former cop. So he was really good at covering his tracks.
Yeah.
But genetic genealogy, man, solved the case after decades. Women who had been raped in their bedrooms and didn't get killed now finally had somebody to blame. There was finally somebody to hold accountable for what he did. So I think that there is always hope. I think there's always a possibility that something could happen. Somebody could come forward. Evidence could be discovered that could link people. I think it's possible. Now, if it is multiple people who are in power, I think that challenge is going to be even harder to solve.
Not to be a pessimist, but if it is a people in power thing, like a governmental thing, I don't think it ever gets solved.
Yeah.
And I think that if it does get solved, because you're right, if it's like a fucking, like the toy box killer guy. Yeah. I think it's more likely than not that evidence will come out.
Yeah.
And that, they'll figure that shit out.
Yeah.
But you have to hope that, right?
Yeah, you have to.
But if it's like a conspiratorial thing where people are in power with a lot of
Covering
money
it up,
and a lot of government pool, I think it is more likely than not that the true ring of people don't get discovered, and that they decide to put someone forward as a scapegoat.
Yeah.
And it gets pinned on them. Now, whether or not that person gets convicted posthumously or not, who knows?
Right.
Because, I mean, could you imagine being the guy that gets it pinned on them and then you have to go to prison? You don't live.
Yeah.
You don't live. There was no... Because of how big that West Mesa Bone Collector became, that story became. I don't think there's a prison in America you go to where you last longer than a month.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So again, pessimistic side of my brain, but I feel like if it is the big, like, multiple people in charge, they put it on somebody who's already dead.
Oh, for sure.
Evidence comes out. It was this person. They died 3 years ago. They died 4 years ago of this cause or whatever.
And it's over now, right?
And they want to, and also, again, it's at this point, it is pure corruption.
Right.
The DA that gets that, they consider the big win. I'm the guy that it was my
solved it.
Right. It was my administration that figured out the thing. And